Only week 16. I remembered. It's one that marked down on my record. He remembered to record the video. Week 16. Yeah. Teamwork. All right, so one of the things that you can do as an extra credit in this class is that you can design a font. So I'm going to go over how you can sort of approach that, and then also how you can go about converting it from just the drawn letters into an actual font using an extension for Illustrator which is called Font Self. So I have this file open which I started before the class. So I designed this font in about half an hour before the class started, which kind of looks like it, I suppose, to be honest. But this file that I'm working on is a file that comes with Font Self. So Font Self is a software extension for Illustrator. And basically what it allows you to do is to draw out your letter forms for the alphabet. And you would want to draw out like the uppercase. Right now all I've typed out is the uppercase, or all I've drawn, I should say, is the uppercase. And then I've saved it as a font. So now I can type with it, you know. So now I can go in here and I can type with this font that I've called Works. So on the side of this shows up under Window Extensions when you install it, and when you open up this panel, on the side of the panel there's a pull-down menu, and there are two files. One is called Welcome Gazette. And the Welcome Gazette is basically like a guide as to how to use the software. The design's a little bit quirky and not super legible, but it's a pretty simple process. So here it says, quick start. Let's turn this lettering into a font. So they've got these letters that are just drawn already that you can use to practice on. So if you were to drag these out, you could drag these into a new font. So if I create a new font, or new style from the current font. So I'm going to create a new font. A new style would be, let's say I'd made this other font called Works and I wanted to make a bold version of it. I could then make another version that would be a new style of that font. But in this case, I'm going to create a whole new font. And then you can see up here it has these settings for capital letters, lowercase letters, numbers, or you could do batch. If I grab all of these letters here, which are all lowercase, and I click on the A to Z for lowercase, it will then load those letters into there. Now, if I didn't have enough letters, too many objects are selected. So this might be that I have the guides unlocked, and maybe I selected the guides as well. Let's try that again. So I'll do it from here. I'm going to go to View, Guides. Yeah, they're locked. Let's just try it again. So I'm going to click on the A to Z lowercase. And now it's loaded that as a font. So I haven't got the uppercase letters in here yet, or the numbers. But if you wanted to save this as a font now, you could choose Save. And then you could give it a name. And then you could save this font. I'll just save this onto my desktop. And then you could install it also. So if I wanted to install the font, I can click here. And now it's installed on my system. So if I want to use the font, I can type. So this font I'd named Testing. So if I go up to the top here, type in Testing, there's the font that I just created. So it's pretty simple, really. All you're basically doing. So there's a little bit more to it than that, because you can change things like where the baseline is, or where the image is relative to the baseline. You can adjust hinting and things like that. So there's a little bit more to it than what I was just showing, but that's the basics of it. Yeah, it's a third-party plugin, so you do have to buy it. Let me just see. I think it's about $40, something like that. So if you buy it just for Illustrator, it's $39. If you buy it for Illustrator and Photoshop as a bundle, it's $59. But to be honest with you, I can't really picture why you'd want to design a font in Photoshop, because generally you'd want a font to be vector-based. So I don't quite get that, but I haven't tried it, so there may be some advantage to it. Like, let's say you want to do hand-drawn lettering and you want to draw it in Photoshop with a tablet, maybe easy. I don't know. But yeah, you can use it in any software. So once you've created it, you can use it. Once you've loaded the software, you can use it in any software. Once you've loaded the font, once you've installed it, you can use it in InDesign, Photoshop, Illustrator, doesn't matter. So as far as the extra credit is concerned, you could just design the font itself, and if you don't have access to the font self software, you could just do a kind of poster design using the font, so you'd have to move each letter individually and make some type out of it. But you could do something like that as a way to present it. I have to set up an assignment for this extra credit, but I'll set one up after the class with all of the requirements. But basically, I want you to do, if you look at this guide right here, I want you to use this. You just need to do all of the uppercase, all of the lowercase, and then all of the numbers, okay? So you don't have to do any of these special characters, but I would suggest doing maybe a couple of them just to kind of have them with it, like the question mark maybe. You don't have to do any of the advanced Latin character set at all, okay? So this gives you some idea of the amount of characters that goes into designing a font. It may be more than this as well, because you might have other like ligatures and things like that, but this is a sort of basic set. So I wanted to review as well a little bit of some approaches to designing fonts. So here all I'm doing is literally drawing over the top of this template. And you'll notice that the template, first of all, it is set up as a template. So if I go into outline mode, I can still see the image of the type underneath it. Remember that this file that I'm working on comes with the software. So I can give you this file if you want to work over the top of it, because it might help to kind of keep yourself organized when you're working on it. But I'm going to look at a couple of different ways. Earlier in the semester, when we were talking about type, I had done some demonstrations for how you could design your own letter forms. So one example would be you could use a grid structure, right? If you go to Illustrator Preferences, Guides and Grid, remember, you can break down your grid structure however you want. So by default, this is 1 inch with 8 subdivisions. So 72 points is the same as 1 inch. So if I did 8 subdivisions, I'd end up with something like that. Then if I go to View, Snap to Grid, anything that I draw then is going to draw accurately towards the grid. So any shape that I draw. So let's say I wanted to draw a letter A. I can drag out some rectangles. At the top here, if I wanted this shape to be a curved shape, rather than have it go straight up like here, what I could do as well is we could use the pen tool. The pen tool on the grid also can be the grid can be very useful even on the pen tool. Like if I click here and then I go up to this point diagonally, 45 degrees, and then click across horizontally, this will end up creating an exact curve that goes into there. This one came across too far. Oh no, actually this one needs to come over a little bit. So then I've got an exact circle that goes there. If I draw another one that goes up here then. So this time my handle on the directional line wants to come all the way to this edge, and on this other side it should match here. Then we could end up with a shape that looks like that. I'll send this one to the back. select that other shape that's over the top of it, and then I can use Shape Builder and delete this part of it. Yeah. Well, just actually, you don't need to hold Shift because you're on the grid and you're snapping to grid. Let's say I wanted to create a curve here. If I go down, I'll start here and go up. So if I click and drag there, this handle here needs to line up with that. Then if I go across here, this will line up here. This we now know is an exact curve, you know. So as well as being useful for drawing straight lines, because I think when I first demonstrated this with you, I probably did it as a Distill type font, which is where everything is basically sort of rectilinear, like this type of thing. But you can make much more complicated fonts by starting from that point and then gradually refining it. So let's say I created a letter B. I'll have this part go across here. I'm going to go across here, go across here. I'll connect all this together. Another way that we can create those curves is that once I join everything together, I can then adjust the shapes themselves. So if I go to Pathfinder, I can unite this as one shape. At this point then, I could go in here. There are anchor points where these shapes join, so I'm going to take those off by using the pen tool and clicking on those anchor points to remove them. That way, they're not going to interfere. If I try to curve this, they won't get in the way and stop it. So here as well, I could set a specific amount, right? So like maybe 0.25 IN for inches. That way I know it fits exactly into those two squares. This one I can just drag it because that'll stop it anyway. And then the same here. This one again, I'd want to take off this point and this point probably. And then again, I can click on here and we get our corner widget and we can adjust the curve of that. Then on the inside, maybe I only adjust it by 1/8 of an inch. You can select multiple corners. So if I select this one, so these are all with the direct selection tool. So I'm selecting all of those corners. Then at the top here, I could set it to a mathematical number, 0.125 inches. So that they all fit into there kind of nicely. Here, if I want to subtract from the shape, I could draw here, click and drag back out. So we've got this shape that sits over the top, and then I could use minus front to remove that part of the letter. Here now I think that this needs to curve a little bit more. So I'm going to take this handle off, and I'm going to take that point off. And then here, I just need to drag this up to that point. That looks a little bit better. One of the things that I'm not really considering in this design right now is the fact that optically we see vertical lines as thinner than horizontal lines. So I'm not going to consider it at this point in the design, but at a certain point in the design you might want to remember that when you have a font, that this line is usually a little bit thicker, or this stroke is usually a little thicker than this stroke, right? So at a certain point as well, if you want to make a more refined font, we could go to Illustrator Preferences, Guides and Grid, and we could adjust the subdivisions. So instead of having 8 subdivisions, maybe I have 32. 8 would go into 32, so this would then be still fitting into the grid, but I now could make more fine detail. So for instance, if I wanted to add a serif right here, I could click and drag, click back on it to get rid of that trailing handle, go down, I'll go inside a little bit, and then we've got a little serif that we could then use at the top as well, like Lego. I could reflect this. So my suggestion is, if you're making a serif font, duplicate this a couple of times and reflect it. So reflect it this way, and then I'll select both of those and I'll reflect it the other way. So that was vertical, this is horizontal. Hit copy, and then I'll drag these down a little bit. That way, anytime I want a serif, I can just drag it from here, hold Option to duplicate it, and snap it into position. here as well, as this is a serif typeface, the thins and thicks would be more exaggerated. So here, for instance, if I go into outline mode, I might select across here, go up a couple of steps here, and then right here I'll select here and go down. I'm nudging it with the arrows on the keyboard. So it's still fitting into the grid structure. At the end, you might go in and make fine adjustments, like in the corners here. Maybe it has a really, really slight corner like that. So instead of it being totally sharp, it just slightly softens it. Same with the serifs. Maybe the serifs aren't quite like that. Maybe they come in really slightly rounded like that. And then I could unite this together as one shape, so we don't have those separate serifs. So that's what that one looks like without the grid. So when you're designing with the grid, you could make quite elaborate fonts. In fact, as elaborate as you want, really, using the grid structure as a way to structure it. The other thing to bear in mind is that throughout the font, there is going to be a repetition of forms. So for instance, if you're doing a letter O, the letter O can be used again for the letter Q. If you're doing a D could be reflected to make a B if you're doing lowercase letters and so on. So although it seems like a lot, and it is a lot of different drawings that you're creating, we're trying to create a sense of consistency usually throughout a font, right? So that all of the different letter forms feel like they belong together. So by utilizing parts of them again and reusing them helps to do that. Also using a grid structure. I'm going to change my grid structure now back to just 8 subdivisions. You could also make kind of like digital type fonts by adding dots like this. So I'm just drawing one circle. Now I'll duplicate it and I'll do Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D. Make a bunch of those. And then I'll drag this down. Hold Option. Actually, I'll just do it to there. Hold Option to duplicate it. Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, Command D, all the way down. And then if I want to make this into a letter form, I can select parts of it. So let's say I wanted a number 3. I could select this bit and change the color of that area. You could delete them as well, but if you just change the color, you can always set it back again pretty easily. So here I'll select through there, eyedropper that color. Maybe on the front end here, these are also grayed off. Maybe here we make it come in a little bit. So you could make a form this way. I could maybe also have these shapes come in. Maybe there as well. So you can imagine how you just take that then, and if you want to change it into another number, we can just select certain areas of it and then change the color. And you could do it with other shapes, obviously. So that's with circles, but it could be with a square, it could be with a, diamond shape or a triangular shape or something like that. Another approach to creating fonts would be to start with an existing font and then modify it in some way. So there's a well-known font from the early 90s, which is called Blur, that was designed by Neville Brody. This font is literally taking a letter form, blurring it, and then sharpening it again. So if you get a font, you could type out all of the letters. So I'll just do a few. I'll open up the spacing. So there's a little bit of space around them so that when we blur it, it doesn't really matter. And then I'm going to change this to semi-bold. Okay, now if I go to Object, Rasterize, we can convert this into a bitmap image. And we also want to add some space around the outside because we're going to blur it. If we don't add space around it, there'll be nowhere for it to blur into. So let's add, say, 1/2 inch, 0.5 IN around the outside and then press OK. So we've got this image now of type. If I then go to Effects, Blur, so under the Photoshop effects, Blur, Gaussian Blur, I could drop this back down. The more blurred I make it, the more rounded it becomes. And then once I've blurred it as much as I want, I can go up to Image Trace up here, because we want it to be a vector. I can go down to where it says Silhouettes. And then I can see what it would look like at this point. Right now it looks like this. I can also open up the Image Trace panel. And then in the Image Trace panel, I could adjust the threshold. So we'd get a lighter version of that font if we brought the threshold down. If we bring it too far down, it'll actually start to break apart. So it's kind of it actually creates kind of an interesting effect when it starts to disintegrate like that and you're missing parts of the letters, but you can still just about read it, like that kind of thing. Now if I expand it up here, so these are vector shapes, you might still want to go in and refine them a little bit. So when I look at this one, I might smooth out this edge right here. So I could use the smooth tool, which is hidden with the pencil tool, and just run my cursor over that to kind of smooth out that edge a little bit. Same here. And down this edge. If I look at the B, I might do the same thing here as well, like clean up that a little bit. So you could go in and you could refine it after the fact. But we've very quickly got kind of an interesting set of letter forms. And then if you wanted to make this into a font, if you have this font, where did I go to? Extensions. If I go to font self again, I could then make this into a font by just simply dragging it into the A to Z. So if I was to make a new font, I could use that. Obviously I would want to type out all of the letters first, uppercase, lowercase, numbers and so on. But that's another approach you could take, is by modifying the letter forms in some way. You might experiment with fonts that are even made out of stuff. You know, you could take photographic images. Let's say I took a I'll get a picture of an A-frame ladder. Maybe I want to make a font which is based on the idea of different tools. You know? I could take something like this. I'll copy it, go into Photoshop. Paste this. Now I want this to be a silhouette of black and white. So if we first of all take a look at the layers. If I duplicate this and put it onto multiply, it'll darken everything that's underneath. Actually, that doesn't seem to be making a lot of difference. Just darken it a little bit. I'll duplicate it again. So it's gradually everything is getting darker as I multiply it. In this image, the background is all white, so it's pretty simple. I'll merge all that together. I'll desaturate it, Shift Command U, that gets rid of all of the color. So that's Image, Adjustment, and then Desaturate. Then if I do a levels adjustment, I can bring this even darker. So we're basically going to black. Now if I go too far, you can see around the edge, we get a bit of a mess. So I don't want to go that far yet. And I'll bring it into maybe about there. And then if I use the, we might actually be able to get a good selection. This might be a better way of doing it. I'm going to go to Image, sorry, let's go to select and then subject. Yeah, it didn't give me a great selection. Let's revert this one. Let me see if I can get it from here. So I'll do image, select subject. Yeah, it's still not quite selecting it very well for some reason. Let's try object select. Oh, I don't know why it's having a hard time selecting that. Seems like it should be pretty easy to select. Let me go back to my original approach then. So I might on this one actually have to draw some of the selection in. So like on this area here, I could use the polygonal lasso tool and select through there. And then fill that with black. I could then go through here, fill all this bit in. And then once I have the whole thing created, I could select all, copy, go into Illustrator, paste this, and then image trace that, silhouette. We could adjust, the quality of that, the threshold settings, and how accurately it's drawing the path and stuff like that. But maybe this becomes a letter A in your alphabet, and then maybe you choose a drill and have that be a letter P, and so on. Could be something more creative in that way. So there's some ways to think about this idea. So this is for an extra credit. I haven't got the assignment up there yet, but basically you design the alphabet, A through Z, upper and lower case, plus the numbers. And if you can get the plugin for this, which I always forget where it is. It's under Window, Extensions, Font Self Maker. You can do that. If you can't get a hold of this software because you can't afford to buy it right now, and you do the font, you could give me the font and we can make it, export it as a font if you want. Yeah, you just give me the Illustrator file and then we'll try and make it into a font for you next week. All right. What's that? I know, yeah. You've got lots of. There's also for extra credit, you can do the tracing we did earlier in the semester. Remember, as a vector tracing. You can only do one extra credit, by the way, but you have options to do any of these. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, but you have options to do any of these. So you can either do the isometric building. Actually, I'll tell you what. If you do the isometric, I'll override that because I would really like to have a lot of them in there. So if you've done another extra credit and you want to also do that, you can do that. But for the other extra credits, you can only really do one. Okay. So there's the designer font. I'll also let you do a short animation. So you could take one of your characters maybe that you did earlier in the semester and have it animate. And then the other thing that you could do is the font design and the tracing. I think that's it. It's those four things. You got options, yeah. All right, I think I'm going to leave it at that point. So it's a little bit of a short demonstration in today's class, but I don't think there was anything else I wanted to go over right now. What I would like to do is see where people are at with their projects and help people individually.
I would really appreciate feedback there online.
Okay. Oh, I didn't open up today's class. What did I open that one? I guess I had.